Now let's bring in Rami Houri, who's Director of Global Engagement at the American University of Beirut. He joins us live via Skype from Cambridge in the US. Thanks for your time, sir. Earlier on, we heard from a speaker speaking from the Palestinian area, and they felt very much that politics had crept into this decision, into this analysis by the United States. Do you share that view?
Absolutely. This is not only a political statement by the U.S. rather than a technical one about an investigation, a forensic investigation, but this is a political statement that reiterates, reaffirms, and expands a legacy of over 100 years in which Western powers, the British in 1915, the Americans in the last 50 years, have stood behind Israel in virtually everything that it does. All of its illegal activities, occupation, annexation, assassination, incarceration, all the terrible things that Israel keeps doing, which have been repeatedly called out by international investigations. Recently, 6 international credible investigations say the Israeli system of control of the occupied Palestinian areas is apartheid. The U.S. will have none of that. The government will not accept any of that in the same way that the British government in 1915 simply accepted what the Zionist movement said, and they issued the Balfour Declaration, and they gave the land of Palestine to the Zionists to create an Israeli state, which the Israelis did successfully. And this is the same trajectory from 1915 until today. Israeli groups successfully lying to the world and in some cases using political pressure to maintain steadfast support so that you get in the United States, where I am now, every few months you will hear American politicians tell the Israelis, we have your back. There's no daylight between the U.S. and Israel. And that is the policy, that Israel cannot do wrong in the eyes of the United States. And it's reaffirmed over and over and over again, despite the growing evidence that this is not a fair or realistic conclusion.
Just to summarise the findings of the United States, I mean, they basically say that it looks like the Israeli army did it. It looks like this was a mistake, but the results are inconclusive because the bullet was badly damaged. Is there a danger in not connecting very obvious dots?
Of course there's a danger, but it's the danger that the United States government completely ignores. The United States government, when it comes to Israel and Palestine, is firmly on the side of Israel. It doesn't recognize the Palestinians as having equal rights to statehood and sovereignty and territorial integrity and security and national identity.
And where should the international community stand on all of this, sir?
Pardon?
Where should the international community stand on all of this, and what should they make of these findings?
Well, the international community is as perplexed as the Palestinians and many people around the world are of what to do, because the U.S. is so strong that it can just ignore all of the criticisms, which is what the Israelis are also doing, because they're also very strong. And therefore, people will criticize Israel repeatedly, as has happened in the last year with these reports about Israeli apartheid. They just ignore it, essentially. Now, the only new thing that's important here is that these kinds of actions by the Israeli government or the U.S. government, and often the British government in tow, these kinds of actions are not ignored like they were in 1915. There is massive pushback in the international media, in Congress in the U.S., all over Europe, all over the region. People are aware of what the Israelis are doing. They document it all on cell phones. They write reports about it. So the Israelis and the Zionist groups that are with them all over the world are not operating in the vacuum that they were operating in before, even just 20, 30 years ago. There's now massive publicity to what Israel is doing, and people trying to explore how to bring accountability to the actions of Israel. And nobody has found a way to do this yet. This quest will continue to go on in the courts, in political arenas, and public opinion in different ways. And this is the great tragedy, that the Israelis and the Americans continue to ignore the rule of law. And the super irony is that this is the 4th of July, the anniversary here in the United States of the Declaration of Independence of a country that was supposed to be based on the rule of law and equality and freedom. But what the U.S. is saying is that actually what the U.S. was formed on is what it is supporting here in Palestine and Israel, which is apartheid, subjugation, oppression, occupation, double standards, inhuman policies. So this is the great tension we have.
Right.
The world gets angrier and angrier and doesn't know what to do about it.
Right, we're still waiting to hear in full an Israeli response to all of this. But what do you think these findings, how do you think these findings will be interpreted? What will be made of these findings by the Israeli military, for instance?
By the Israeli military, you said?
By military and government.
The Israeli response is very clear. They've already said it, and what was interesting was the American State Department statement and the Israeli statement both emphasized the same thing, that the Israelis were there fighting terrorism because Palestinians have been attacking Israelis and killing Israelis in recent months, but of course Israelis have killed many, many more Palestinians in recent months. The Israelis kill about between 1 and 2 young men a week now, mostly unarmed young Palestinians in the West Bank. In the occupied areas, they just shoot them. The response of the Israelis has been very clear. They will continue to use the same strategy that they have used very successfully since 1915, but in recent years with a lot more pushback from the world. They'll explain why they're having to do this, that they're under threat, there's anti-Semitism, people are trying to kill the Jews just because they're Jews. They can't have their own little state when the Arabs have all this empty land all around the region. This kind of public relations lying simply doesn't have the same impact it used to years ago, because many people have refuted all these arguments, and more people are taking legal action when they can around the world. So the Israelis are really caught in a bind where their traditional responses are not working as well as they used to, but the place where they still work is in the halls of the British government and the American government, and increasingly less so in the parliaments of those countries, because more and more independent parliamentarians are speaking out for the U.S. to treat the Palestinians and the Israelis equally as people who have the same right to statehood and security and sovereignty and the rule of law and accountability. So I don't think we should expect any change from the Israeli government, but the thing to look for is what kind of new activities will be undertaken by Palestinians and Arabs and people all over the world to try to bring in some accountability to the killing spree and the expansionist settlement spree that the Israelis continue to undertake in Palestine.
Rami Khoury, Director of Global Engagement at the American University of Beirut. Thank you.